19 of the last 21 FA Cup finals have been won by teams who will be playing in Europe next season. The other two clubs will be in League One. Portsmouth may have just got their hands on the League Two trophy, but considering they were FA Cup champions 9 years ago, it just shows how far they'd fallen. Let's have a look at whatever happened to the starting 11 from that FA Cup victory over Cardiff City in May 2008. David James. If there's an admirable quality to have, it's knowing when to quit. David James was already approaching his 38th birthday when he lifted the FA Cup with Portsmouth. I wonder if he knew then that he'd have another 7 seasons in him. He returned to the FA Cup final with Pompey 2 years later, losing to Chelsea. After short-lived spells at Bristol City, Bournemouth and an unpronounceable club in Iceland, he hung up his boots at Kerala Blasters in the Indian Super League at the age of 44, where he was also player-manager. In 2014, the BT Sport pundit was declared bankrupt. Glen Johnson. Having excelled during his 3 years at Portsmouth, Glen Johnson was finally rewarded with a big money move to Liverpool in 2009. His performances were so impressive that even Chelsea tried to bring him back to the club, prepared to forget his previous spell at Stamford Bridge, where defending was always an afterthought. He spent 6 years at Anfield, making 200 appearances and winning a League Cup, but after repeated criticism, he finally left for Stoke City in 2015. The 32-year-old's fine performances for the Potters saw him linked with Barcelona this season. I was confused as well. Sol Campbell. Remember when Notts County were going to be the next superpower of English football? It took Sol Campbell all of 90 minutes in League One to realise that no they weren't. Having been enticed to sign for the supposedly ambitious club in the summer of 2009, he made his debut against Morecambe on a bobbly pitch and walked out 3 days later, claiming that he had been a mug. He subsequently returned to Arsenal until the end of the season, before retiring in the Championship with Newcastle the following campaign. After a failed political campaign, where he tried to run for Mayor of London, in a city where thousands hate him, he was appointed assistant manager of Trinidad and Tobago in January 2017. Sylvain Distin. In his prime, Sylvain Distin was one solid centre-back, who was probably underrated by many. The Frenchman stayed at Fratton Park for a further year before signing for Everton in a £5 million deal. He had a mostly successful 6 years at Goodison Park. Just don't mention the back pass which gave Liverpool a ticket to the FA Cup final in 2012. He spent a season at Bournemouth following his release in 2015 and has been without a club for the last year. At 39 years of age, come on Sylvain, it's time to call it a day. Herman Hreidissen. Herman Hreidissen was already a Premier League veteran when he signed for Portsmouth in 2007. Having been in England for 10 years, he spent 5 years at Fratton Park, leaving the club in 2012. He spent the briefest of spells at Coventry City, injuring himself after just 2 games. He was scheduled to return to Portsmouth on trial 9 months after leaving the club, which sort of shows how quickly they were sinking. He was appointed manager of his hometown club IBV instead. Currently in Iceland managing Fylkir. John Utaka, a then record signing for Portsmouth in 2007 at £7 million, the fans might have expected more than a 1 in 9 goal return. After struggling to get him off their books, he finally left Fratton Park for Montpellier in 2011, with the club having finished 16th in the championship. He would then take in a spell at Turkish side Sivasspor in 2013. He returned to Egyptian side Ismaili in 2016, only for the club to immediately rip up his contract once they saw what sort of physical condition he'd got himself into. At 35 years old, he signed for Egyptian side Aswan. I wonder if he still looks out for Portsmouth's results. Doubtful. Pedro Mendes. Pedro Mendes is known for 3 things in England: long-range screamers, destroying Roy Carroll's reputation, and getting poleaxed into next week by Ben Thatcher. He didn't score many goals at Fratton Park, but when he did, Jesus, keepers take cover. He signed for Rangers after the cup final, endeared himself to the fans with a blistering strike against Celtic within 2 weeks of signing, and would go on to lift the Scottish Premier League. After spells with Sporting Lisbon and Vitória back in Portugal, the Champions League winner finally called it a day in 2012. He's never too far from Rangers though. He's only the agent of the current boss Pedro Queixena. Lassana Diarra. Find me a more impatient footballer than Lassana Diarra. Go on, I'll wait. After struggling for game time at Chelsea, the Frenchman gave it 6 months at Arsenal before deciding he'd had enough of watching Fabregas and Flamini from the bench, dropping down a level to Portsmouth. The ironic thing was that he'd win more there than the Gunners would for the next 5 years. He got another big move in January 2009, signing for Real Madrid in an £18 million deal. After flirting between the bench, the starting 11 and the transfer list during his 3.5 seasons at the club, he linked up with Samuel Eto'o and Andy Makachala, remember them, in 2012. After that project failed, with the club putting their entire squad up for sale, he stayed in Russia with Lokomotiv Moscow. He was also banned for 15 months and had to pay the club €10 million for breach of contract when he refused to show up for training. He spent the next 2 years playing for Marseille and dodging Harry Redknapp's phone calls. At 32 years of age, he's just signed for Al Jazeera. Suleiman Tari. If Suleiman Tari thought an FA Cup victory over Cardiff City was as good as it was going to get for him, he was wrong. Dead wrong. He signed for Inter Milan within a few weeks, at probably the best possible time as they were embarking on a supremely successful era under Jose Mourinho. During his 4 seasons at the club, he helped win the treble. He took in a loan spell at Sunderland, didn't do much before returning to Milan, this time with AC. He signed for Pescara in January 2017 and recently stormed off a pitch after he was booked for complaining about racist abuse. Nico Cranky must have made a serious impression on Harry Redknapp because he's tried to sign him practically everywhere he's been. The Croatian winger spent 3 years at Spurs before leaving for Dynamo Kiev in 2012. Redknapp took him to QPR for a couple of loans before he moved to New York Cosmos in 2016. At 32 years of age, he's currently at Rangers. Canoe. When Harry Redknapp rescued Canoe from the pits of unemployment in 2006, little did either of them know that the alleged 28-year-old would fire them both to an FA Cup win 2 years later. The Nigerian striker developed a huge rapport with the fans, playing more games for Portsmouth than he did any other club in his career. In a fitting way that sums up the entire Pompey story of the last decade, it did end on a sour note. In July 2012, Canoe threatened to sue the club for £3 million of unpaid wages over the previous 6 years. He left the club the same month, but the following year mysteriously dropped the case and allowed Pompey to keep the cash. After undergoing corrective heart surgery in 2014, he opened the Canoe Heart Foundation, which has gone on to perform hundreds of open heart surgeries. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe.